Hi, welcome to Chapter and Verse. I'm Rick Bleiweiss, and I am truly honored today to be here with the fabulous Russ Tamblyn and his wife, Bonnie. And for those of you who need a little refresher on Russ, although I doubt you do, but I'll give it anyway. Um, Russ was Gideon in the movie Seven Brides for Seven Brothers. He was Riff in West Side Story. He's an Academy Award nominee for Peyton Place. He's a Golden Globe winner. He was in Twin Peaks. He did what I consider to be one of the most iconic dance sequences, the shovel dance in The Fastest Gun Alive. He's a gymnast, a choreographer. He was in Samson and Delilah. He was in Django Unchained. He was father of the bride with Liz Taylor and Spencer Tracy, good friend and worked with Neil Young. And this is Russ's book. It's his memoir, Dancing on the Edge. And before we start, I would just like to read what Quentin Tarantino wrote on the top of the book. And he wrote, "There are some lives you have to read to believe they were really lived. Russ Tamblyn lived one of those lives, a killer story about one of our last remaining living legends of the screen." Quite the statement from Quentin. So tell us about the photo, Russ.
I can hardly hear what I have to say. Those were the days, I guess. You know, I walk around with a walker now and a cane, and I used to jump over cars.
Well, you know, that's what aging will do you. So
Yeah.
the photo on the cover of the book, there's story behind it?
Well, there's it's a little story, actually. I mean, I was at we were making West Side Story, and I was in my costume and everything, and a photographer wanted to take pictures of me, so I said sure, and I had a little time off, so we walked around where they were constructing a lot, because we worked where they were tearing down a lot of old buildings and everything, and there was this big fire going on and he said, "Oh, can you jump in front of the fire?" And I said, Sure, you know, I can jump in front of anything." So I jumped, and he caught this picture, and I didn't think about it after that. I kind of like forgot it, and until we did the book, and we were wondering about a cover, we just happened to look and said, "Hey, this would be a good one," you know. Dancing on the Edge kind of fit the title of the book.
Oh,
So
absolutely. Well,
Where
cool.
was Radio City, where they were tearing all the buildings down to build radio?
Yeah, I think it was where Radio City Music Hall is now.
Oh.
And then
Well, cool. It's a great photo. So, Russ, your first film role, I think, or one of your earliest, was The Boy with Green Hair. And I think you were in that with Dean Stockwell. Is that correct? And you've become lifelong friends with him?
Yeah, that's what happened. And we became good friends at that time. And then he kind of went one way and I went another way, and I didn't see him for a long time until I ran into him one time in Hollywood, and I was having a party for the writer for Henry Miller, and so I invited him, and that was the beginning of our friendship again, and then it just went on and on.
Well, that's great. That's great. And then I mentioned you were in Samson and Delilah, and I believe you probably had a couple of adventures with Victor Mature during the filming of that.
Well, I had one. He was really a character, and he's a funny character. He came in one time with a black eye, and they had to put makeup on it. I said, "What happened?" and he said, my wife slugged me. And I said, what did you do? And he said, I didn't do anything. It was very funny. And he also, he had a dog, and I remember that his dog was on the set, and and Hedy Lamarr, we were visiting her in her dressing room, and his dog started licking her leg, and I remember Vic said, "Hey, I can't do that, and you can't either."
That's great. So what was it like working with Cecil B. DeMille? I mean, I know he's one of the, landmark directors, if you will.
Just he was bigger than hell, and he walked around with a writing stick all the time, and he was very funny. Even when I got the part, I remember he came out. I did a screen test. I think that was the only screen test I ever did, was that one. And
wow.
We did it, and there was a window, a one-way window, and after the test, which I did with another actor that was under contract to Paramount, we did it, and he came out, and he just said, very good, you got the part. It was really quick and easy, and there he was with his writing crop, and then working on the film was incredible. He had two people that worked with him all the time, and there was one guy that walked around behind him with a chair, and he used to hold the chair, and he would walk around behind him, and DeMille, when he would just sit down, and that chair better be there. That was one thing. And then there was another guy that walked around with him who held a microphone, and his voice went all over the. I remember it was a huge set, giant set, and he. I remember that when he talked, it went all over the. Thousands of extras all heard it, and one of the things he did was I had to do this scene with Vic, where I walk up to him and grab him, and no, where I walked. This was a scene where I had to point to my slingshot, and I said, "Hey, I got my slingshot on my head. We could fight a." It's a pretty dumb thing, but. So I got my slingshot on my head. We could fight our way out of here. And so I point to it and I say, "This is my slingshot. We could fight our way out of here." And he came and he says, "Okay, we have to do it again." And again, it went all over the stadium. And so we did it again. And he said, "Don't keep your hand here. Point to your slingshot back here so he can see your face." And I said, "Okay," and then they line up and everything, and they got ready. So we did it, and I did it again. I was only like a 10-year-old kid, and I did the same thing. I said, "I got my slingshot on my head," and he said, "Cut!" And he came in and he grabbed my hand. I remember he grabbed my hand and he said, "Don't put your hand here. Put it here, not here. But here," like that, and I was just a little kid, and it just and it went all over. So like 1,000 extras, or it seemed like there were 100, that they all heard it, and I just started to cry, and it felt awful.
Oh wow!
So he had that kind of loudness, kind of
a command.
Command is the better word, I guess.
Good word. So you were also you were friends with Elizabeth Taylor, correct? And you did a few films with her.
Yeah, I did just one film, I think.
Just Father of the Bride.
Father of the Bride and Father's Little Dividend. Yeah, when she was very young and beautiful. But I was in school with her too at
Oh, really?
the MGM school, and in my book there's a picture of us at her graduation in the little red schoolhouse. In the schoolhouse there was Elizabeth Taylor and Dean Stockwell and me, and then another actor, Claude Jarman Jr. Do you remember who he was?
Yeah, I do. I
He was
remember
in
that name.
a movie called 𝐿'I'I'I'I'I'I'I'I'I'I'I'I'I'I'I'I'I'I'I'I'I'I'I'I'I'I'I'I'I'And he was, but he got too tall, I guess. He got really tall as a young boy, and he was like 6'5" or something. I don't know if he was that tall, but he was really tall, and he couldn't get work after the 𝐿'I'I'I'I'I'I'I'I'I'I'I'I'I'I'I'I'I'I'I'I'I'I'I'I'I'I'I'I'I'I'I'Anyway, with she was in school with Dean and I were all in there, and it was like the last of her last year in school, and she was 18 then, I think, and she was just finishing, so she could care less. And the one story that was funny is that the photographers were taking a picture of her leaving the schoolhouse, and they were taking pictures of her graduation, and then they wanted to take some more pictures of her outside the schoolhouse. It was a little red schoolhouse, and so they were taking them, and Dean and I were playing ping pong. They had a ping pong table in the schoolhouse, so we weren't paying any attention to it, and all of a sudden she came screaming at us, says, "Wow, hold it," like that. She went running out.
The teacher.
The teacher,
Yeah.
Miss McDonald. And she looked like a teacher. She looked like she was hired as a teacher, like an actress would be if they wanted to get one. She had a part in the middle of her head way back, and Miss McDonald, and she always wore a high shirt up there. And so she ran out, and she stopped the photographers and said, they were taking pictures of her throwing her books in the air like she finished school, And
Right.
the photographers thought it was great. She thought it was great. And Miss McDonald ran and said, "You can't do that." And she grabbed the camera from the cameraman and tore the film out and made him, because she said, you can't do that. What kind of message would that be giving to the rest of the students?
All over the country.
All over the country, yeah.
Absolutely.
And then I was with her again she made a movie. What was the name?
Raintree County.
Raintree County, and they had a huge premiere in I can't remember where it was, in Louisiana. No, in someplace back east. And she came to the premiere with her then husband, who was
Michael Todd.
Yeah.
Michael Todd.
Yeah.
And so I went up to I remember I got invited to go up to her room, and there was just Elizabeth and myself, and Michael Todd was walking around in his socks, and he was like. He was raving on and on and on, and about Elizabeth, and that he was going to have a big wedding, and that they were paying him like $100,000 or something, and for to put the wedding in Yankee Stadium or something, and
Wow.
and he was talking about it, and he said, and I remember there was a photographer in the room too, and he said, "Well, are you going to?" He said, "Queen Elizabeth is going to be in town at the same time as as her. He says, "Are you going to invite her?" He says, "I'm not going to invite her, but she can come if she wants." And I remember I thought that was pretty funny.
Yeah. So, speaking of Queen Elizabeth, wasn't it Queen Elizabeth where there was a royal performance you were at with her in London with Peter Sellers?
It was at a premiere, and it was a premiere of West Side Story, and we met her backstage. There was a big line of people in backstage, and then we were ushered up to the royal seats, and they happened to seat me right behind her, and it was up in the royal box, and she was sitting right in front of me, and Peter Sellers was sitting next to me, and we were friends because we did a movie, Tom Thumb, together, and Peter was very quiet and didn't say much at all. He wasn't that funny most of the time. He was dull, and he was. But all of a sudden, they started playing the overture of West Side Story, the music, and then the curtain started to open, and Peter leaned forward towards the Queen, and he said, "Lady, would you mind taking your crown off?" I thought that was a great line.
That's it. And didn't you get hit on by Princess Margaret or something like that?
Yes, after the premiere, after the movie, she asked me if I wanted to. I don't know if it was a hit or not, but it was it was kind of that. And then I heard that she was kind of like that way, and she invited me to go, but I already had plans, so I couldn't.
Well, she kept looking at
a party.
You too.
Yeah, she kept looking at
trying
me.
to get your attention.
Trying to get my attention, and
that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
So
that's right.
Yeah. So tell me something. You had something to do with Elvis Presley and Jailhouse Rock, and what was it?
Well, it was just that we were friends. He kind of, how did I meet him? I can't even remember how I met him. Actually, I had a friend, an actor named Nick Adams, and Nick was friends with Elvis, and he brought him to my beach house. And Nick used to come to my beach house all the time. So one day he showed up, like 3 limousines pulled up in front of like my little beach house, and there he was with Elvis and all of his cousins, and they all came in, and Elvis was, and that's when I met him. We kind of became friends, and he said, and we talked, and I told him I was about ready to go to back east to make a movie. I was going to go and make Peyton Place. And he said, "What are you going to do with your beach house?" I said, "Well, it's going to just sit here." And he said, "Can I rent it from you?" And I said, "Yeah, good idea." So he rented it from me. And he said, "I need a place to get away to, because he says, I have a huge floor, not more than just a room, but a huge floor at the Beverly Hills Hotel. And he said, I need somewhere to get away to." And I said, "Oh, well, that would be perfect if you came here." And but I didn't realize that I went and made the movie, and I didn't realize that when he came with all of his cousins and girls, and the place was just an absolute mess. There were peanut butter and banana sandwiches in the bed, even. I mean, that he would leave, and push them down to the end of the bed, and in a drawer, and it was really terrible. So I had to. And the owner of the I got kicked out. The owner of the I was just renting the I
Oh,
was
wow.
just renting the house, and he came and told me that that I had to leave, and then I owed, I don't know, it was eight or $900 for all the damage that he had
Oh,
to
wow.
do. But he did. He took glasses and down to the beach, and he would have drinks down there and then leave them. And so all the glasses were gone. The place was a dirty mess. It was heavy duty bad. And so I had to call Colonel Parker and tell him that I had all this $800 worth of damage, and Elvis would have to pay for it. So he sent me a check and paid for the damage. And one of the things he did was he left a pair of boots there with EP on them, and they were like an old beat up pair, but he'd had them for a long time. And so I tried them on, and they didn't fit me, and I gave them to my older brother who lived in Arizona in the East. And I told him, I said, well, these are Elvis's boots. And so I forgot all about it. And then I started reading about how valuable all of his stuff were. And they were selling after he died selling a belt for, $1,000 and all this stuff. And I thought, oh my God, I should have kept those boots. I didn't realize how valuable they were. So I called my brother in Arizona and I said, "You still have those boots?" He said, "Oh, no. They didn't fit me and I had to give them away." And he said, "I gave them to the Salvation Army." And I went, "Oh God."
Oh.
I said, they were Elvis's boots. And he says, "I know." He says, "I told the guy at the Salvation Army," I said, "these are Elvis's boots." And he says, "Oh, yeah, sure. Like, Elvis is the only one with initials ZP." No, so that was pretty funny.
So now, but yeah, it was funny. So Elvis was known as the pelvis. He had moves, but didn't you teach him some move that he used in Jailhouse Rock?
Yeah, I guess I got tracked away there, but he was working on Jailhouse Rock, and the choreographer was Alex Romero, and so I went to see Alex on the set and Elvis, and I was kind of knew both of them well, and Elvis said, "What do you think about my moves?" And he was showing me some moves, and so I worked on him. I said, "Well, I can help you with your knees, with going in and out like that." And so I worked with him on that. And a lot of people thought that I was the choreographer of the movie, that I had choreographed Elvis, but I really didn't choreograph him. Alex Romero did, but I did show him some moves or helped him moves.
Cool. So Henry Miller, I know you were good friends with Henry Miller. And how did that come about?
Well, it came about because I became a friend of. I had a friend. His name was Joe Gray, and his brother worked for Dean Martin. He was kind of like his man, and Joe was an extra, and but he was a good friend of mine. And Joe and I used to talk about Henry Miller. I had a record album actually, by Henry.
Oh,
And we were like both big fans of his. And so but he was friends with him, and I was at the beach house, and I was out swimming one day, and I was swimming like out from the house, about 50 yards out, maybe less, and he and Joe came on he came on with Henry, and I could recognize him right away that he was with him up on the balcony of my on the patio of my beach house, and he waved at me and swam really fast back to land. I couldn't believe it, and came up and met him, and it was a great meeting. I did paintings too, but they were like really square, just paintings that anybody would paint. And he walked around looking on all the paintings, and I remember he looked at it all and he would go, hmm. That's all he did was making noisy. And he never, and and I was like, God, does he like him or not? What does mean? But we talked, and he became friends, and he said, I've just got a beach house I'm staying with a friend down the block on Pacific Coast Highway. So I got his phone number, and he had mine, and we talked. I remember one time I was going to work with 𝐬𝐻𝐫𝐸 in The Wonderful World of the Brothers Grimm, and she was like, she said, you know Henry Miller, and so I thought, oh boy, I'm going to impress her with this. I said, yeah, we became friends a while ago. So I moved to Pacific Palisades. Oh, anyway, with Yvette, I called him up and said, yeah, we got an invitation to go up to Yvette's house for lunch. And he said, oh, great. He says, she's a pretty girl. I know who she is. And so he was happy to go up there. So I picked him up and drove him. He didn't drive. And I drove him up to Yvette's house, and we had lunch, and it was just a great afternoon. She knew a lot about him, and that was the beginning. And then I moved to Pacific Palisades, and he came up and we had lunch a couple of times. And he said, I really like it up here. This is terrific. And I think I'll look for a house up here. And so he moved up there. He found a house in the Palisades, and he moved up there. And he asked me if I would. He said, "Boy, can you introduce me to people? Anybody? I don't know anyone up here." And I said, "Sure, I'd be happy to." So I had a party for him. It was a big party, and that's when I when I was in town. And I ran into Dean Stockwell, and Dean, I hadn't seen him in years, but I told him I was having a party. And here's the funny part, is that I invited him to come to the party, and he said, he said, yeah, I'd love to come there. So he called me like a day before the party, Dean did, and Dean said, and I thought that he said there was a comedian named Shelley Berman who used to do a telephone routine early on, and he was very funny. And I thought he said Alice and Shelley Berman. He said, I have two friends, Alice and Shelley Berman. Is it okay if I bring them? And I said, oh, absolutely, absolutely, yeah, bring them. but it wasn't Alice and Shelley Berman. It was Wallace and Shirley Berman, and he was the artist that came, and he came and he had long hair, and when he came to the door, I was so disappointed, but he came in and sat down, and it was Wallace said he sent me a book that he had made. It was a small little book, and I loved it. It was really beautiful, and he had a note in there and said, "Come on by anytime." And so I went to see him. He had a little house up in Beverly Canyon, and it was up a dead end street, and it was really a little house. It was a small, almost like a shack, and I wasn't used to that. I was living in the Palisades in a big 6-bedroom house. So I went to see him, and I walked in, and it was like a little shack, and there was even a piece of ivy that came down in his living room that came down through the ceiling. And I said, "Boy, what do you do with that when it rains?" And he says, "I watch it." That was a great line. So that started me on a whole different track.
Well, for anybody that doesn't know who's watching us, Russ has become, for a number of years now, a really good artist who's painting self for what a good artist should. And Wallace Berman, who he's talking about, is one of the crucial and seminal figures from the early LA art scene. And I believe he was a big influence in you in art, wasn't he?
Huge. Yeah, he really changed I moved from Henry Miller really to Wallace Berman. Wallace Berman was one of the beatnik guys that was friends with the
Kerouac,
with Allen Ginsberg and Kerouac and all those guys from San Francisco. He was one of the early beatniks. But it was more than just a beatnik. He was just a very profound guy, and dropped one-liners all the time, and he was my mentor in art, and we used to drive into to art shows. He really turned me on to art and galleries, and
cool.
We would go visit him, and so he was a huge influence on me.
Cool.
And a big pal for a long time.
And he moved up to Topanga.
Go ahead.
Yeah,
I'm sorry, Bonnie.
Yeah, we all lived up in Topanga at that time. I gave up my Palisades house and got a smaller house in Topanga. Lived on the side of a hill.
Well, before we talk a little more about Topanga, tell me about one of your other friends, and that was Debbie Reynolds. And wasn't there something about her and Eddie Fisher and their honeymoon or something like that you were involved in?
Yeah, she was a good pal of mine, and she was such a down-to-earth, sweet, lovely person. I really liked her. I kept a picture of her in my wallet for a long time. We played opposite each other in a movie called Hit the Deck, and we danced together. And she was just a great friend, and she was going with Eddie Fisher, and she wanted to go to Palm Springs. I think it said in the notes that it was her honeymoon, but it was before she got married, but she said she wanted to get away and go to Palm Springs, and she asked me, she said, all of the paparazzi, they all know her car. So she wanted to trade cars. So I gave her my car and she gave me hers, and she went with Eddie, and that was that experience, which was kind of funny.
Yeah. So while you were in Topanga, didn't you get offered the role of Gilligan in Gilligan's Island?
Yeah, I did get a semi offer for that, and turned it down. I thought I said, that's just a dumb show. That'll never go anywhere. I could have been a millionaire.
Yeah, that was a pretty successful show.
It was unbelievably successful. Yeah.
Wow. So Neil Young, you've done a lot of work with Neil Young. How'd you guys meet, and what's that all about?
Well, that's interesting. That I lived up on the end of this dead end street in Topanga then, and next door to me, and next door, and it was only like one other house on the street. It was just a hill with weeds and everything, and then there was a house below me, and that was the house of the woman that lived that worked in the cafe down in the square, in Topanga Square, and Neil used to like to go in there and have lunch or something, and he fell in love with her that ran it, and so they ended up getting married, and he moved next door to me. And he lived next door to me, so he used to walk up the hill, and it was maybe like 100 yards or 50 yards maybe up to my house, and he would come up, and he was just a good friend, and so we became good friends, and he finally got so popular that fans started coming up, and they would sit down below his house and wait for him to come and get his mail or something, and it was driving him crazy. So
they were blocking the street too.
They were blocking the street.
It was
Yeah.
a big problem.
Yeah, sometimes I would drive down and there would be all these fans down there. So he moved up to below San Francisco, and he bought a huge piece of property, and he lived. So he lived there, and we sort of didn't lose contact, but we weren't as close as we were when he was living in Topanga. And then finally, one day, he came by the house with Larry Johnson, who was his producer, and they came in the house and sat down, and and he said that he wanted to make a movie that that Warner Brothers had wanted to promote one of his records, and so they would give him enough money to make it, and it was more than enough. It was half, and Neil thought he would put up another bunch of money and make a movie instead of just having a promotion of his record.
Right.
So he got. So he wrote this script called. Can you remember the name?
After the Gold Rush.
Yeah, he wrote this. Dean wrote this script called After the Gold Rush, and that was what we were going to make as a movie. And Neil wrote all the music, wrote the music for it, but Warner Brothers wouldn't have anything to do with it. Didn't want to do it. I guess a little beyond them at the time. So it kind of fell apart, and he went back up north to his ranch, and and then he decided to make it. Then he would put up the money. That's what happened. And so he made this movie, Human Highway, and I played his best friend in it, and Dean Stockwell played his manager.
Okay.
And so it was almost like a homemade movie.
Devo was in it.
And Devo was in it.
And your character in that was an homage to Fred Astaire and Gene Kelly, I believe. Is that correct?
Yes, it was. In fact, I wore tap shoes at the beginning of a few scenes, but they got so noisy that was driving the sound man crazy. So we had to do it without the tap shoes. And I decided, and we each named ourselves. And I named myself Fred Kelly, as for Fred Astaire and Gene Kelly.
Cool.
To tie. So it's kind of funny. It was a silly movie, but I think it'll end up being a classic.
It's a great movie.
So,
and why did Neil?
Go ahead.
Why was Neil's name? What did he call himself?
Neil called himself, I can't remember.
Lionel.
Lionel, from Lionel Trains.
Oh, really?
He was a big train fan. Oh. And in fact, he bought the company of Lionel Trains. And
really?
Yeah, in fact, he sent me. We'd have to look at sometime. We have that in a box, a whole train set. It was really pretty cool.
Tell me about the barn. His train, the barn.
And he had a train in the barn. It was a big habit of his, and he had on his property, he had a bunch of several different buildings. One had all of his guitars in it, and one was a train building. He built a train in there for his son, and it went all over the place. It was huge, and Neil used to work on making bridges and little people standing around.
Wow.
Pretty fun.
Yeah, I don't know if you remember them, but I remember in my childhood that there were some restaurants where they would like burger shops, but they had a train that went around the counter and brought burgers to you. Did you ever go into one of those?
No, I didn't know that.
I did.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Remember those? Yeah. Now it's sushi.
Yeah, you're right. Now it's sushi. So as long as we're hearing from Bonnie, I understand that you and Bonnie met through the producer of the Beach Boys and Linda Ronstadt. How did that occur?
She could tell you that.
Okay, maybe I'll come in here.
Yeah, come on in.
Well, it all started with Dean Stockwell, actually. Dean was, of course, Russ was living with Dean in Laurel Canyon. And Dean had a girlfriend at the time, Valerie Vinay, who was estranged from Nick. And she introduced me. I was working with Nick. He was my producer. And Valerie, I was playing at the Troubadour, which is a preeminent club in Hollywood. That's where you go if you want to expose your music. And I had a band, and I was playing there. And Russ and Dean came to see me. Valerie was my friend, and she said, "You got to come and see this girl, Bonnie Tamblyn." It's Bonnie Murray at the time. Come and see her and meet her. And so Russ and Dean came to see me, but unfortunately, they stopped at a few cocktail spots before they got to the Troubadour.
We missed her performance.
Yeah, they came in a little late. But it was a lovely meeting, and Russ and I connected right away at the time. And then he came to see me about a month later at another club in Topanga called the Topanga Corral. You may have heard of that also.
Yes, I did.
That's when we really clicked. So we can thank Dean Stockwell for connecting Russ and me.
Excellent. Well, and
was and it's been like how long? 30 years or
45, honey.
44.
Well, and
Yeah.
you got showbiz throughout your whole family. I mean, your daughter Amber is an actress and multi-talented, and your brother Larry was in the Standells who did Dirty Water, and I mean, it's pervasive in your family, the whole showbiz thing.
True, yeah, it's true. I come from a show business family. My mother and father were both. My father was a young juvenile uh, lead in New York in a couple of big shows, Follow Through and Good News. There were huge big shows, and my mother was a chorus girl, and they got married, and
Oh, wow.
so I came from a big family.
Yeah.
I have a little bit too. My dad was a concert master of Republic Studios.
Oh, wow.
And so all the old John Wayne movies you see, if you hear a solo violinist, that
That's
was
it?
my dad.
Oh,
Yeah.
cool. Oh, that's very
Alex.
cool.
Yeah, so I'm a Hollywood girl.
There you
Went to
go.
Hollywood High School.
And Russ, you started really young, didn't you? I mean, if I'm not mistaken, didn't you like start like in between movies and a double bill where you would do tumbling at like age 5 or something like that? Or no? I thought I read that somewhere.
I think it was that he was going to theaters, matinees as a little guy, and he would get up on the stage.
Yeah,
and tell him that story about how how they discovered you, quote unquote.
Yeah.
Well, it was. I remember my mother took me to one of my father's movies that he had done, and I saw him, and he was like bigger than ever up on the stage, and it really turned me on, and I ended up going to matinees that were like for kids. On Saturday mornings, they would show serials and
Right.
cartoons and stuff like that. And so during the intermission, one Saturday morning, I ran up on the stage and started dancing around. And when I saw that, you could tell that because it was all kids. And when I saw this man running down the stage, I knew he was coming after me. So I leaped off and would crawl under the seats until I got up, till I got away from him. And I did that like a couple of times on a couple of Saturdays. And then one Saturday I went up on the stage to dance, and he came out from the side. He knew I was going to do something. And he grabbed me and took me in the office and got my phone number. Like a fool, I gave it to him. And he called my mother and told her I was making a pest out of myself, And so she started me in dancing lessons, or tap dancing lessons at a studio, Bob Cole Dance Studio in Hawthorne, I think it was. And that started me out.
Oh, cool. Now, didn't you want to be in the circus at one point? Did I read that?
Well, yeah, I don't know where you read that, but that was true, that I would have been great in a circus, but I had all all the talent for being a circus, and I worked in a circus. I did a circus show that when I was I was working in England, in London, when I was working in Tom Thumb. I got a call from Lucille Ball, and she had, I guess, split up from Ricky or bought him out, and now she was the head of a whole she was one of the first women
Yep.
producers, and she called me and said she had a show that she was producing. Do you remember the name of that, Bonnie?
Oh, I'm drawing a blank. It was a circus show, though. It was for the.
Yeah, it was a circus show that that she was producing, and she asked me if I wanted to do it, and I passed on it because I said I'm working now and I don't particularly want to do it. But
She doubled the fee.
But she didn't double it. It went from $5,000 to 750,000 or something. So it was a lot of money,
Wow.
and I couldn't turn it down. So I did it, and I flew back and went straight to Florida and worked in the movie, which was the big circus makers, and they filmed me actually working in a couple of the circus shows as a clown. So I walked around juggling and
The Greatest Show on Earth.
Yeah, it was a
Yeah, I
television
remember
show
that.
called The Greatest
Yeah.
Show on Earth.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And so that was great fun, and I could have just lived the rest of my life working in a circus.
Because nobody knew who you were. You were a clown, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nobody knew who I was when I was
Sure.
working when I was doing my bit in the circus. And I also had Jack Palance was the star of the show.
Okay.
And I had to do a scene with him where I was on a trapeze and where he caught me. And so that was a lot of fun.
Cool. So speaking of fun, I know you've done theater work, and I believe that one of your more favorite shows you ever in was The Music Man. Is that correct?
Yeah, it was one of them. I had a great fun doing that, The Music Man, because I could do some magic tricks. I remember I did, which was I thought that would be a good part for a con man to be doing magic tricks. And I did it in Arizona. You remember that, Bonnie?
I do. Go ahead, Rick. Well, we brought our little daughter, Amber, and then one time Russ did Follies when she was just born. And the showgirls in the back would hold Amber like an infant with all the feathers and the glitter and glamour. And we've always said that's how Amber got her bug to be in show business. That's
cool. It's a great start. Great start. And so talk to me about Twin Peaks. What was that experience like?
It was a great experience. Probably one of my best emotional experiences as an actor, because I got to play a character named Dr. Jacoby,
Right.
And he was like this eccentric, which everybody thought at the beginning of it was the killer of Laura Palmer.
Right.
But I did that part, and I still have Bonnie just showed me the glasses. I still have my glasses from that. I invented them, which I thought was pretty wild.
Yeah, very wild.
Yeah, I had them made.
Oh, you did?
Yeah, I had them. Well, I had them. Of course, they wouldn't make glasses like that for anybody with an ounce of brains. But I I I took them to show David Lynch, and he said, and he had a high voice, and he said, "Russ, that's a great. I love the glasses. Let's just not tell anybody why you're wearing them," because I explained that I had an excuse for wearing them. I said, you know, that the the brain is bicameral,
Mhm.
and you know, half of it. I said one half is
Emotional.
emotional and active and creative, and the other side is academic. So I said the academic side are wearing the red lens on that side to brighten up everything, and the other side, the red side,
Emotional side.
the emotional side, I'm wearing them to calm things down.
That's great.
David said, let's not tell anybody.
Yeah.
David likes secrets, so.
Yeah.
Now, was there something about a limousine ride with Twin Peaks with David Lynch or something like that? Some incident?
Michael Horse. It was with Michael Horse.
Yeah,
Michael
Horse.
Well, we rode back from we drove back from Philadelphia to New York. In fact, in Philadelphia, I bought one of David Lynch's art pieces, and I still have it. And I rode with Michael Horse, and he just had all these Indian jokes coming back.
Funny.
And he said, you know, the television show Love Boat? And I said, yeah. He says, I'm writing a television show called Love Canoe. He had jokes like that when it kept me in stitches.
Yeah.
Well, I think we'll wrap it up now. And I just want to remind everybody, Dancing on the Edge, Russ's memoir. If you really enjoyed this session, you should really read this book. I mean, it is a book that everybody should read, filled with fabulous Hollywood lore and history and Russ's life, and just well written too. Russ, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you both.
Appreciate it. And it is a good book, I'll tell you. I worked on it for like 25 years off and on. So
You lived it. You did a lot of it.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
Well,
Really
thank
good
you
to
both.
see you.
Yeah.
Good to see you, Rick. Yeah.
Same here, Bonnie. Both of you. Thank you so much.